Of all the talks I've given these last 8 weeks, this one has been the most difficult one, and I thought it was going to be the easiest one. But when I got down to it, it wasn't easy to put together. I didn't quite know how to do it. But I was talking to my friend Marcus yesterday, and he said, "Are you going to do a recap of the whole thing? You know, all the talks, as sort of a celebration?" And I said, "No." And then I thought, actually, that's a good idea. So I'm going to do that. And then I met my other friend, another one of my friends this afternoon, Sia, and I told her I was going to do that. And she said, "Oh, no, I don't want to hear a recap of the whole thing." But anyway, she said she was going to arrive late, about 1:15 when the recap ends, but she's here. So welcome, Sia and Marcus and everybody. So yeah, it won't be a long recap, I hope. I'm just going to quickly look at the 7 qualities that we've done so far. And if you remember, the first one I did was about wonder. The whole talk was about a sense of wonder and the importance of a sense of wonder, and how I think it's a pity that the Buddhist texts don't seem to make anything at all, as far as I can see, of the sense of wonder, even though you've got 8 wonderful and marvelous qualities. It doesn't seem to me that they're talking really about the sense of wonder there, but anyway. So then that was the first talk. The second talk, I went into the first strange and wonderful thing about the Dharma. And it was that it was the ocean gradually shelves, slopes, and inclines, and there is no sudden precipice. Exactly the same with the Dharma. There is a gradual training, a gradual course, a gradual progression, and there is no sudden penetration to final knowledge, and so on. And in that talk, you may remember, I talked about a sutta called the Ratnaguna Sutta, the relay chariots. And actually it's before the Buddha got to talking about the relay chariots, but there are 10 things, great things to do. I won't go through all of them, but the first 4 I thought were very interesting. Wanting little, contentment, solitude, not delighting or not needing society. That's the first 4. Then the next one was energy, and then the next one was ethics. The 6th one's ethics. So I made quite a lot of that, the fact that ethics, we usually think ethics is the first stage of the path, but according to this, it doesn't come till number 6. And if we did the first part of the path, maybe our ethical behavior would be easier. Then talk 3, which I call the narrow path to freedom, was about the second strange and wonderful thing. So just as the great ocean is stable and does not exceed the limits of the tide line, although it does really, Buddha didn't know that. So also my disciples do not transgress a training rule laid down by me, even for the sake of their lives. So I talked about training and discipline really, and I explored what could be seen as a contradiction between training and freedom. And I just talked about the fact that in order to be free, you need to train to be free, just like musicians do. I use music a lot in that talk. You know, musicians have to practice for years and years before they can play freely. Same with us. Then the next talk, which I called A Bad Apple, with this one, all the strange and wonderful things that the Buddha talks about comes out of an incident that happened. And I told you about that incident, a rather unpleasant incident, where the Buddha can't teach because there's someone in the assembly who's not pure. And so I explored that. Why can't the Buddha teach in an impure assembly? What does that mean? And I finished with the actual Dharma itself, the verse that comes at the end. Rain soddens what is covered up. It does not sodden what is open. Therefore uncover what is covered. Then the rain will not sodden it. That's one of the translations, not one of the best ones, but, and I talked about that's the way that the spiritual community works. It's not a power-based community. It's a love-based community where you can be open, really open about who you really are. You know, you don't have to pretend to be anybody else and so on. That was that one. Then talk 5, which I called Rivers Flowing to the Ocean. And what the Buddha says here is, just as whatever great rivers there are, and he mentioned a few of the rivers in India, on reaching the great ocean, lose their former names and identities and are just called the great ocean. So also, those are the four castes, nobles, Brahmins, merchants and workers, having gone forth from home to the homeless state, abandon their former names and identities and are just called recluses, the followers of the Shakyan sun. So I talked about the caste system for a while and how the Buddha was outspokenly against the caste system. And then I talked about its relevance to us, because we don't actually have the Indian caste system here. So what does it mean to us? It's to do with identity, attachment to our identity, status, group membership. And what the Buddha is saying to us really is we have to let all that go and become individuals, just who we are. And that's how we enter into the Sangha. And at the end, I went into something the Buddha said about the enlightened mind, which is the consciousness is infinite, it's indefinable, and it's luminous all around, universally brilliant. And I connected that with the Metta Sutta, where the Buddha is talking about having an infinite love for all beings. Talk 6, which I call the transcendent other. Just as, although the rivers of the world flow into the great ocean and showers of rain fall from the sky, no lessening or filling up of the great ocean is evident. So also, although many bhikkhus attain final nibbana with no residue left, no lessening or filling up of the nibbana element is evident. And, you know, that's obviously the Buddha making sure that people don't misunderstand the metaphor of the ocean being enlightened. It's only a metaphor, you don't have to take it literally. I talked about that for a while. And then I talked about the fact that I think the ocean is a really great symbol for enlightenment, because although you can see it, you can see the surface of it, you know that you don't really know it. You know that there's depths there. You don't even know how deep it is. So when we say it's deep, we don't really know what we're talking about. So we don't know exactly how deep the ocean is, but it's very, very deep. And I finished with a quote by Goethe, the German writer Goethe, along the lines of that what we need to do is fathom the fathomable and quietly revere the unfathomable. And then I connected that with, once again, the sense of wonder. Seventh talk, last week's talk, called Delighting in the Dharma, because I missed the sixth of the strange and wonderful things. I missed that on purpose because Sangratch has done a brilliant lecture on that called The Taste of Freedom. And I didn't think I needed to do that again. So I asked you if you would listen to that. I don't know if you did, but I'll just tell you what that strange and wonderful quality is. The Buddha says, just as the great ocean has one taste, the taste of salt, so also the Dharma has one taste, the taste of liberation, taste of freedom. But I didn't go into that. So last week was the seventh talk, and it also was the seventh strange and wonderful thing. Just as the great ocean contains many precious substances, various precious substances, so also the Dharma contains many precious things, various precious things. And then the Buddha gives a list of lists, basically called the 37 Bodhipaka Dhammas, including the 4 foundations of mindfulness, the 4 efforts, and so on. But the first part of the talk, I had promised in the second talk that we would come on to this thing that the Buddha says about every one of them. For instance, this is the 7th wonderful and marvelous quality in this Dharma and discipline, seeing which bhikkhus delight in this Dharma discipline. And I promised in the second talk that I would go into this delight at some point. So I did that last week. The first half of the talk was all about delighting in the Dharma and the importance of delighting in the Dharma and loving the Dharma. And if you delight in the Dharma and you love it, you just grow and develop quite naturally. So what I was saying was it's important to try and whatever things in the Dharma that you really like, that you find attracted to, go for them. And because that will really help you if you do that. It'll keep you delighted, it'll keep you inspired. And then the second half of the talk, I decided not to go into any one of the lists that the Buddha gave of the 37 Bodhipaka Dharmas, but I thought I'd go into the list that we're very familiar with, the list of five, the five great stages. And I'll just tell you what the Buddha said about them at the end of that section. There are just 5 things that we need to do every day. And if we do those, we'll be growing in the Dharma. Keep up the effort to be mindful and aware and to be integrated as possible. 2, maintain as positive a mental state as you possibly can. 3, don't lose sight of your ultimate goal at any time. 4, try to apply this practice at every level, meaning whatever you've realized or discovered or seen on the highest level of your being at any time, try to integrate that into your life. And 5, do your best for other people. Do what you can to help people. And those are 5 things you can do all the time, really. That was that one. And now we come to this week. That wasn't too bad, was it, Sia? Wasn't too long, I hope. So this week's strange and wonderful thing. Let's go on to this. Oh, that's taking a long time. Here we are. Okay, so the Buddha says, furthermore, the great ocean is the abode of mighty creatures. Of such creatures as these, the Timi, the Timingala, the I should have practiced this before I gave the talk, I didn't notice. The Timirapingala, Asuras, Nagas, and Gandhabas. These exist in the great ocean. No, there exist in the great ocean beings 100 yojanas in size. So how big's a yojana? It's a very imprecise measurement, but it is said that a king's army can march for about a yojana every day. So I don't know how, that's a few miles, I don't know how many miles that is, but that's a yojana. So 100 of those. So there exist in the great ocean beings 100 yojanas in size, beings 200, 300, 400, and 500 yojanas in size. That's really, really big. Probably there are no beings in the ocean that are really quite that big. But anyway, that's what the Buddha thought in the ocean, because, you know, a few weeks ago I was talking about the fact that the Buddha had never been to the ocean, he'd never seen the ocean. It was like a mystical idea for him. It was an imagined idea. So that's the ocean. And then he says, just as the great ocean is the abode of mighty creatures, etc., etc. So also this Dharma and discipline is the abode of mighty creatures, such as these, the stream entrant, and the one who is on the way to realizing the fruit of stream entry, the once returner, etc., etc., the non-returner, etc., and the arahant, and the one who is on the way to arahantship. This is the 8th wonderful and marvelous quality in this Dharma and discipline. So I'm not going to say very much about this list of things again, because it's a little bit technical and doesn't really do justice to this idea of mighty creatures, great creatures of the deep. But I'll just tell you a little bit about it. So what he's talking about is the 4 great stages on the way to enlightenment, the 4 sort of stages of insight or wisdom that you go through. And the stream entrant, and it's all based in terms of breaking 10 fetters. There are 10 fetters which fetter you to the world. In very traditional terms, these fetter you to continued rebirth. That's the way the Buddha and his disciples used to think about the spiritual life. So the stream entrant has broken the fetters of self-view, that is the belief that there is an unchanging self or soul, attachment to rites and rituals as ends in themselves, and doubt. So that's a stream entrant. A once returner has broken those, plus they've greatly attenuated the next two fetters, sensual desire and ill will. A non-returner has broken sensual desire and ill will. So they've broken what's called the 5 lower fetters. And then there are the 5 higher fetters, and the arahant then breaks the last 5 fetters, which are attachment to the 4 jhanas of the world of form, attachment to the 4 formless jhanas, conceit, restlessness, and ignorance. Now, I'm not going to say any more about that, but you can Google it. You know, Wikipedia's got a very good page on the 10 fetters. And so if you want to find out about them, you can do that there. But I'm not going to do that because, I don't know, it doesn't seem a very good way to talk about great creatures of the deep in such a technical way. So I'm going to talk about them in a more human way. But before I do that, yesterday, when I was trying to think of what I'm going to do for this talk, I thought, I wonder if there's a poem called Great Creatures of the Deep. And there isn't. But there's a song called Creatures of the Deep. And it's a children's song. But I'm not going to sing it, but I'll just recite the first few lines because they're quite nice and they give more of a flavour of where I want to go. So, no one comes here at all. No one sees us at all. In the half light of our ocean world, and the stillness around has a music, a sound those above us have never heard. And we dance to that music divine with a grace and a poise and an elegant line. Lovely, isn't it? So that's his song I found on the internet. But what I'm going to do now is, what am I going to do? Yeah, before I go into that, just talking again about the 8 strange and wonderful things. I've said this a couple of times as we go through them, that they're not all about the Dharma and discipline. In fact, there's only one of them that's about the Dharma, only one. 2, that's the first one, I think. 2, 3, and 4 are about the Sangha. Number 5 is about the Buddha, or the enlightened state, Buddhahood. 6 and 7 is about the Dharma, and 8 is about the Sangha. Now, I got that last bit wrong, actually. 6 is about the Buddha, 7 is about the Dharma, and 8 is the Sangha. That's quite interesting, isn't it? 6, 7, and 8, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So, I've read the text to you, and I've talked about the stream entrance and so on. So, what I'm going to talk about now is the fact that everyone who live, all those great creatures in the ocean, they've all broken at least 3 of the first 3 of the fetters. They're all at least stream entrants or beyond. Yeah, so that's who lives in the ocean. And I was thinking about the ocean again as a metaphor for the Sangha, because that's what it is, isn't it? It's a metaphor. Well, actually, for this one, it's a metaphor for the Dharma, and the great beings live within the Dharma, fully within the Dharma. And it's quite interesting because we can go to the beach and we can play in the water. We can paddle, we can swim, we can play ball, we can mess about in the water, but we have to come out again. We can't actually live in the medium of the water because we're land creatures. We're not water creatures. So with this metaphor, it's as if you're now, when you become a stream entrant, you become amphibious. You actually enter into that place. That's where you live now. You live fully in the water of the Dharma and the Buddha, I suppose. You're fully immersed in the water of the Dharma. And what I was going to do, the reason I had such great trouble with this talk is all the way through, I thought this is going to be an easy talk to give, because what I'll do is I'll just find a few great life stories of some of the Buddha's disciples and just tell you about them. It's a great idea, isn't it? The only problem is, if I did that, I could only talk about men, because the only life stories I could find were about the famous male disciples, you know, Ananda, Mahakashapa, Sariputta, Moggallana. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to give a few women's life stories as well, and there aren't really any. So what I thought, what the idea that came to me the other day was, it's as if we only meet people when they first meet the Buddha. When you read the Pali Canon, the people you get to know are the people they're just first meeting the Buddha, and it's their conversion experience. They become a Buddhist. They go for refuge to the Three Jewels. Maybe they have a deep insight and so on. That's when you meet them, and then you never see them again. So it's a bit like years ago I was in America, and somebody took me on a whale watching boat. So we went off in this boat, and we were looking for whales, and we saw them briefly, like just there's a tail. You just saw the tail go in, and then there's another one. You might miss it, but you might just see the tail. It's a bit like that with these great disciples of the Buddha. You meet them once, and once they become a Buddhist, that's the end of them. They disappear in the ocean. They go right down into the ocean, and they're not available to us anymore. So just think about the first 5 of the Buddha's disciples, you know, the 5 ascetics. You know, they didn't want to know him and so on, but he converted them eventually. And the first one was Kandanya. Kandanya Anyata, the Buddha called him Kandanya Anyata, meaning, because when Kandanya understood, the Buddha said, oh, Kandanya's understood, Kandanya's understood, Kandanya Anyata. And so he called him Kandanya Anyata after that. You never hear him again. That's it. He's a Buddhist and goodbye. He goes into the ocean. You never see or hear of him again. The only one of the 5 that you hear once more is Assaji. Because if you know the story of Sariputta and Moggallana, they were looking for a teacher, and Sariputta bumped into Assaji, and he thought, oh, this guy's impressive. So he said, who's your teacher? And he said, it's the Buddha. And he said, well, what does the Buddha teach? And Assaji said, well, I'm a beginner. I don't really think I can tell you. And he said, go on, tell me. And he just told him, you know, about conditioned co-production. And Sariputta became a stream entrant on the spot. Goodbye, Assaji. We never see him again. Of course, Sariputta and Moggallana we do see again and again, because they became the 2 chief disciples of the Buddha. But what about Kissa Gotami? The great story of Kissa Gotami, which I won't tell you because you all know it. It's a really lovely, moving story of this young woman. Kissa, by the way, is a nickname. It means skinny Gotami. And you know the story, so I won't tell you it again. But she goes for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and the Sangha, and she becomes a nun. You know, she gets a bhikkhuni, and that's it. We never hear from her again. What about Angulimala? You know, the serial killer who the Buddha meets in the forest and converts to the Dharma, never kills anybody again, becomes a bhikkhu. Never hear from him. So that's how it is. They jump into the ocean, and that's it. They love it down there, and they just don't bob up again very much. You might see, you know, a tail every now and then, but not very much of them. So it's very hard to get a life story together of someone. There is a book called Great Disciples of the Buddha by Helmut Hecker and Nyanaponika. And it has got some life stories of the great disciples, very useful. But some of the other sort of little biographies of some of the other minor people, you can just tell they're made up. It's all about previous Buddhas. You know, they went to refuge to a previous Buddha, you know, aeons ago, and all that kind of thing. And they're like fairy stories, really extreme fairy stories. And as you read them, you think, not sure this happened. So I didn't feel like it would be worth telling you all those. Worth buying the book though. But then I thought I'd tell you about someone you probably never heard of. She's a great character. So it's a woman, and just waiting for this to come up. Her name is Bada Kundalakesa. Bada Kundalakesa. So she had previously joined the Jain community. You know, the Jains, they were quite big at the time of the Buddha as well. They were called the Niganthas, the Jains. And she wanted to practice the extreme austerities of the Jains. So what they did for her ordination, they pulled her hair out from the scalp. They just pulled it out. That was part of their first ascetic practice. And then when it grew again, it grew curly. And so Kundala Kesa means curly hair, Bada of the curly hair. But after a while, she got fed up with the giants, the Niganthas, and she left them. And she went to various other teachers trying to find a way forward and didn't find any of them particularly good. But she became really good at discussion and debate. So she became like a freelance debater going around India. And what she'd do, she'd make a little pile of sand and she put a rose apple branch in it. And she'd let everyone know, if anyone wants to debate with me, all you have to do is trample the sand. So, and then someone would debate with her, and I think she won most of her debates until Sariputta came along. So Sariputta said, okay, I'll debate with you. And you can imagine what happened. She did, he did, and she lost. She lost the debate. And so she wanted Sariputta to be her teacher. And he said, no, go and see the Buddha. Go and see the Buddha. So she did. She went to see the Buddha. And the Buddha gave her a teaching. And I'm sure you've heard this teaching before. It's from the Dhammapada. It's from the chapter called The Thousands. And it's number 101. That's easy to remember, isn't it? Verse 101. Better than 1,000 meaningless verses collected together is one meaningful line of verse, on hearing of which one becomes tranquil. That famous teaching of the Buddha. That was said to her. And guess what happened to her? She became an arahant. She became fully enlightened there and then. And the Buddha then said that she was the foremost among the bhikkhus for swift intuition. So amongst the nuns, right, amongst the bhikkhunis, and Bahia, you know, Bahi of the bark garment, he was the foremost of swift intuition amongst the men's wing, and Buddha was the equivalent in the women's wing. There's only one thing that we hear from her ever again, and it's in a text called the Therigatha. I don't know if you know about the Therigatha and the Therigatha. So Thera, T-H-E-R-A, means elder, and Teri is the female version of it, and Gata is verse or song. And it's a lovely text. It's just full of verses of Dharma from the elders. You know, people have been practicing the Dharma for a long time. It's really beautiful. So here's the verse from Bada Kundala Kesa. I travelled before in a single cloth, with shaven head, covered in dust, thinking of faults in the faultless, while in the faulty, seeing no faults. That was before she came across Buddhism, when she was a wanderer. When done was the day's abiding, I went to Mount Vulture Peak and saw the stainless Buddha, by the order of bhikkhus revered. Then before him, my hands in Anjali, humbly I bowed down on my knees. Come, Buddha, he said to me, and thus was I ordained. Debt-free, I travelled for 50 years in Anga, Magadha, and Vaji, in Kasi and Kosala too, living on the alms of a land. That lay supporter, wise man indeed, may many merits accrue to him, who gave a robe to Buddha, for free of all ties is she. Beautiful verse. So humbly I bowed down on my knees before the Buddha, and then the Buddha said, come, Buddha. So that's Ehi Buddha. And that's the way he used to ordain people. He used to say Ehi Bhikkhave for come Bhikkhu. I don't know what it was for women, actually. It must have been Ehi Bhikkhuni Bhavi, maybe. I don't know. But here he said, come. That's all, Ehi. That was her ordination. and debt-free. She traveled for 50 years. So she carried on walking around India. And apparently she became a really well-known teacher. She was a great teacher, really famous teacher. Of course, we know nothing about her now. And then at the end, she talks about a lay supporter. She needed a robe. She needed a Buddhist robe, and she didn't have one. So a lay supporter of the Buddha gave her one, and she still feels grateful to that man. So I thought I'd tell you about her, because probably you've never heard of her before, and she's a great character. But now what I want to do is I want to look at 3 suttas very briefly, one of which many of you will know quite well. The other 2 you probably don't know so well. Well, one of them you probably don't know at all, so I'll be introducing you to it. But the first one is the Chula Gosinga Sutta. Chula means small, Gosinga is a place, and Sutta. And the next one I'm going to talk about is the Maha Gosinga Sutta, the Great Gosinga Sutta. And I think it's really good to look at them both, because they give you 2 sides of what it means to be in the Sangha. So here I just want to introduce to you the idea of the 3rd order of consciousness. And I can't remember whether I did that in an earlier talk. I don't think I did, but even if I did, it's okay. Just to tell you again that in one of the talks anyway, in the rivers flowing to the Dharma, I talked about being a group member and then becoming an individual. So the 1st order of consciousness is group consciousness, where you're fully involved and sort of caught up in the group. The 2nd order of consciousness is when you've emancipated yourself from the group and you're thinking for yourself and taking responsibility for yourself. And that's what we call individuality. But there's a 3rd order of consciousness, which is even beyond individuality, which is where you actually join the Sangha, where it's not that you go back into the group, but your consciousness goes beyond yourself and you're part of everything. So that's the best way I can talk about it for now. But you see, the Chula Gosinga Sutta explains that really well. But the Maha Gosinga Sutta explains also that even when you're in the 3rd order of consciousness, your individuality is intact. So what happens in the Chula Gosinga Sutta? There were these 3 bhikkhus, Anuruddha, Nandya, and Kimbala. And they were staying in Gosinga, which is a park in a forest. And the Buddha came out of his solitary retreat and he went there. He went there, I think, specifically to look for them. And he found them and they welcomed him and so on. And they sat down together and talked. And what's interesting about this sutta is the Buddha doesn't give any teachings. All the Buddha does is ask questions of these 3. He really draws them out. So he says to them, I hope you're keeping well. And I hope you're all right. And I hope you're having no trouble getting any food from the local village. And they all say, yeah, we're fine. We're not having any trouble getting food and we're all very well, thank you. They say that. They don't say it quite like that, but that's what it amounts to. And then he says, I hope you're living in harmony. I hope you're appreciating one another. I hope you're not quarreling. I hope you're blending like milk and water. And I hope you're looking at each other with kindly eyes. And they say, yes, we're doing all of those things. So then the Buddha's not satisfied with that. He wants to know a bit more. He wants to know the details. Well, how? How do you live in this way? Tell me more. Anuruddha speaks and he says, well, look, I'm fortunate. I'm really fortunate to live together with these 2 great guys. I consistently treat these guys, my friends, with kindness by way of body, speech, and mind, both publicly and privately. And I think to myself, this is still Anuruddha speaking, and I think, why don't I set aside my own ideas about what I want to do and just go along with these others, what they want to do? Why don't I do that? And that's what I do, he says. Though we're different in body, We're one in mind, it seems to me. So different in body, but one in mind. And then the others say the same. They say, yeah, they say, so they all feel really fortunate to be living with the other two. And they say, yeah, we try to do the same. We're always looking after the others, and each one of us thinks, I'll set aside what I want for the other two. Good. And the Buddha says, good, Aniruddha, good. That's a translation of sadhu. So he says, sadhu, Aniruddha, sadhu. And then he says, but I hope you're living diligently, keen and resolute, meaning still putting effort into the spiritual life. And yes, they are, they say they are. And he says, but how? How do you do that? And then they tell him how they live, basically. They say, well, look, when we go on alms rounds, when we come back, we go in different directions, you know. When we come back, the first one back prepares the seats for the meal, and they put out the drinking water and the rubbish bin. They do all that before the others get there. And then at the end of the meal, if there's anything left over, whoever returns last, they eat it if they like. Otherwise, they throw it out where there is little life that grows, or they drop it into water that has no living creatures. So they're looking after the local creatures as well. They're vegetarians, vegans probably. And then they put away the seats, the drinking water, the rubbish bin, and they sweep up behind them. And if anyone sees that the pot of water for washing, drinking on the toilet is empty, they set it up again. And if they can't do that on their own, they ask someone else just with a wave of a hand, and they do all that without speaking. They do it all just by looking at each other and being in tune with each other. And then they say, that's how we live, diligently, keen and resolute. Good, Aniruddha, good, he says. But then he says, okay, that's really good, but do you get into high states of consciousness? Do you get into jhana? And then they say, yes, they do. And then they tell him they go through the 4 jhanas, and then the 4 higher jhanas, the 4 jhanas of the formless world. They do all that. And so he describes all that. And then the Buddha does at last give a teaching, but you don't know what that is. It just says the Buddha then gave a teaching, but we're not party to that. He gave a teaching, and then he left, and they went with him for some way, and then they came back to where they were. And then, so Aniruddha had been doing most of the speaking. And then the other two say, did we ever tell you that we gained such and such meditations, that we went up through the jhanas like that? And Aniruddha said, no, but I knew. I could just tell, I could comprehend your minds. Oh, right. And then the other two say, yeah, we could do that too. So they were so in tune with each other, physically, emotionally, mentally, that they were just one, although they had 3 bodies. When the Buddha gets back, a god comes along and talks about these 3. And the Buddha says to them, these 3 guys, they're practicing for the welfare and happiness of people, out of compassion for the world, for the benefit, welfare and happiness of gods and humans. And then he says something very interesting. If the whole world were to recollect or think about these 3 with confident heart, pasana chitta, pasana is faithful, trusting heart, that will be for the whole world's lasting welfare and happiness. When I was studying this text a little while ago with Sumitras, I realized that it was what I call a performative text. I realized that there, in the Pali Canon, well, in all of the canons, I suppose, there's what I think of as informative texts. They tell you stuff, they tell you how to live, how to meditate, how to practice the Dharma and so on. They're informative. But some texts, they're more performative. They don't really tell you very much about how to actually live, but you rehearse them. They're like sadhanas, you just have to rehearse them over and over again. And that's why a lot of Buddhists in the East, they just read text out loud. That's their practice. They don't meditate so much as just chant text. they're performative. And although there's quite a lot about how to live, if you're in a jungle with two other great guys like that, it doesn't easily translate to ordinary life, you know, especially if you've got children. Good luck if you try to get them to do all that without speaking to them, etc., etc. And if you've got a dog or anything like that, it's not going to work. But so it gives you some ideas, but I think the text, especially when they start talking about the jhanas, because after the second jhana, they've lost me. It's just like, well, I don't go there. I've never been there. But just by hearing it or reading out loud, it's as if you go with them all the way. So I think of this text as a performative text. Anyway, that's that one. And then there's a Mahagosinga Sutta, same place. But this time it's in the park of the Gosinga Salfrey Wood again. But this time the Buddha's there. But so are some of the great creatures of the deep that you've all heard of. So it starts, so the Buddha was there with a number of very well-known elder disciples: Sariputta, Mahamoggallana, Mahakāshyapa, Aniruddha again, Revata, Ananda, and other very well-known disciples. So it starts. It was evening, and Mahamoggallana rose up from his meditation. They'd all been meditating, and went over to Mahakāshyapa and said to him, "Friend Kāshyapa, let's go to the Venerable Sariputta to listen to the Dharma." "Yes, friend," the Venerable Mahakāshyapa replied. So this is interesting, I think, because they're all enlightened. They're all arahants. But Mahamoggallana's got this idea, oh, let's go and see if Sariputta will give us a teaching. Why do they need a teaching? They're enlightened already. Well, they enjoy it. It's like us watching Netflix. You know, I think, what should we watch tonight? Let's go to Sariputta and hear a teaching, even though we won't really need it. We've heard this teaching before, let's watch it again. So it's lovely. That's what they love to do. They love to hear the Dharma. So they're on their way, the two of them are on their way, and then Ananda sees them. He sees them and he says, "Where are you two going?" And they say, "Oh, we're going to Sariputta to see if he'll teach us the Dharma." He says, "Oh, I'll come." And then he's with Revata and he says, "Revata, do you want to come?" So the four of them go. And so that's four of them go to see Sariputta, right? So then Sariputta sees them coming. And for some reason, he picks Ananda up. He says, "Ah, Ananda, let the Venerable Ananda come, Ehi. Welcome to the Venerable Ananda, the Blessed One's attendant, who is always in the Blessed One's presence." Then he says, "Friends, the Gosinga solitary wood is delightful. The night is moonlit. The sala trees are all in blossom, and heavenly scents seem to be floating in the air. What kind of bhikkhu, friend Ananda, could illuminate further the Gosinga sala tree wood?" Illuminate. So it's really beautiful, and there's the moonlight shining. But the idea is that the bhikkhus can illuminate the wood even further. Do you remember? You probably don't. The second talk I gave, I talked about this idea of being delighting in society, and the Buddha said, don't do that. And what he said was, a bhikkhu does not shine in society, doesn't illuminate, sopa, and it's the same word here. So they can make the dark shine forth, they can illuminate the dark just by being there. So here's another interesting thing. They've all gone to see to Sariputta to see if he'll give a teaching, but he doesn't. He asks them to speak. He asks Ananda to speak, and Ananda does. And Ananda says, "Oh, okay then." So he says, "A bhikkhu who has learned much, remembers what he's learned, and consolidates what he's learned, and he teaches the Dharma to the four assemblies," tell you what they are in a moment, "with well-rounded and coherent statements and phrases. That kind of bhikkhu could illuminate this Gosinga tree wood." Well, that's very interesting, because that's exactly the kind of guy that Ananda is. That's what he was, preeminent. The Buddha used to say to people, "You're the best at such and such, you're preeminent." And of course, Ananda, he said, he's preeminent. in remembering the Dharma and teaching it. So what he's really good at, and the Buddhist, so Ananda knows that, and he knows that he can light up the wood with his own, with that quality. So what happens then is he says, oh yeah, Sariputra says, oh, that's great. You've spoken according to your own inspiration. You could say you've spoken according to your own sort of take, your own interpretation, what delights you about the Dharma. So then he asks Revatar, Ananda has spoken according to his own inspiration. Now we ask you the same question. So Revatar speaks. Now Revatar is preeminent in meditation. So guess what he talks about? Revatar. A bhikkhu delights in solitary meditation and takes delight in solitary meditation. He is devoted to internal serenity of mind, etc., etc., etc. So he talks about what he's really good at, and they all do, basically, they all do that. So what I love about this sutra is the fact that these great beings, first of all, they want to hear the Dharma, they want to talk about the Dharma. And when they do, they all come at it from their own particular point of view. They're all individuals. They don't, it's like that talk when I talked about the rivers flowing into the ocean. It's just like you lose yourself completely. You know, the water just becomes the ocean and there's no being left in a way. But with this one, there are great creatures in the ocean. They keep their shape, they keep their size, they keep their individuality. And that's what this sutta says to me. It's like every one of those disciples is different from one another. And that's the way they go on like this. That happens for a while. And then they say, let's go and see the Buddha and tell him what we've been talking about. So they do, and they repeat it all. And the Buddha says, good, good, very good. He keeps saying that, sadhu, sadhu. And then he says, you've all spoken from your own inspiration. And then he says, I'll do it now. And then he talks about a bhikkhu who is always making efforts to become enlightened, which of course the Buddha did. You could say the preeminent quality of the Buddha was his tremendous determination to gain enlightenment. So that's those two suttas, and that's all about bhikkhus, famous bhikkhus. And I'm going to end with another story and another sutta. And do you remember a few weeks ago I talked about Nakula Pitta? Nakula Pitta means the father of Nakula, and no one ever knows who Nakula is. But Nakula, you might remember, he was very old and ill. He went to see the Buddha and he said, Buddha, can you give me a teaching specifically for someone who's old and ill? So the Buddha does. And then they part company. And then he then goes to see Sariputta. Nakula Pitta goes to see Sariputta, and Sariputta says, oh, you look really bright, your complexion. Well, what's happened to you? Have you just, has the Buddha just given you a teaching? And he says, yes, but he says it in a particular way. He says, yes, the Buddha has just anointed me with the deathless, anointed me with the ambrosia of the deathless, which is absolutely wonderful and beautiful. I love that. But anyway, Nakula Pitta is Nakula's father, but there's Nakula Mata too, Nakula's mother. And they're a married couple. And they met the Buddha many, many years previously when they were a bit younger. And the way they met them, according to the text, is Nakula was walking along his village and the Buddha came along. And Nakula went to the Buddha and said, where have you been all these years, my son? I've been missing you. And the Buddha said, sorry. And he said, well, you're my son, aren't you? And the Buddha said, don't think so. Actually, he didn't. He knew exactly what Nakula was talking about. It was a previous life. The Buddha was his son in a previous life. That's the way these Pali texts go. But anyway, leaving that aside, him and his wife, Nakula Pitta and Nakula Mata, were devoted followers of the Buddha. But in this sutta, called the Nakula Sutta, we find that Nakula Pitta was diseased, in pain, severely ill once again. And he was worried. He was worried that he was so ill that he was going to die. And he wasn't worried on his account, he was worried for the sake of his wife. And she knew that. So she said to him, don't be worried as you die. Death is painful for one who is worried. And the Buddha has also criticized being worried at the time of death, so don't worry. And then she says, you might be thinking that I won't be able to support the children or maintain the household once you've gone. But you shouldn't see things like that. I'm skilled at spinning cotton, at carding matted wool. I can support the children and maintain the household after you have gone. So don't worry if you're going to die. Death is painful for you if you worry. So she says that. And then she says, you might be thinking that I'll take another husband once you've gone. But you shouldn't see things in that way. Both you and I know that we've remained celibate while at home for the past 16 years. So don't be worried as you die, because that's not going to happen. Then she says, you might be thinking that I'll have no desire to go and see the Buddha or go to see the community of monks after you've gone. But that's not the case. I will have an even greater desire to go and see the Buddha once you've gone. So don't be worried about that. You might be thinking that I won't act fully in accordance with the precepts after you've gone. But that's not the case. To the extent that the Blessed One has householder female disciples who act fully in accordance with the precepts, I am one of them. And then she says something extra here that she hasn't said before. If anyone doubts or denies this, let him go and ask the Buddha, the worthy one, the rightly self-awakened one, who is staying among the buggers in the deer park right now near Crocodile Haunt. So don't be worried as you die. She goes on, you might be thinking that I won't attain inner tranquility of awareness after you've gone, but that's not the case. To the extent that the Blessed One has householder female disciples who attain inner tranquility of awareness, I am one of them. And if anyone doubts or denies this, just go and see the Buddha. You know where he is. Not that he could, of course, because he was rather ill. Finally, I think this is the final one. You might be thinking that I won't reach the firm ground in this doctrine and discipline, will not attain a firm foothold, will not attain consolation, will not overcome my doubts, dispel my perplexity, or reach fearlessness or gain independence from others with regard to the teacher's message, but you shouldn't see things in that way. What all that means is, all that amounts to stream entry, irreversibility from the path. To the extent that the Blessed One has householder female disciples who reach firm ground, etc., etc., I'm one of those. So what she's saying is she's a stream entrant. So don't you be worried about me. So she so puts his mind at rest, it gets well. His disease was immediately allayed. Maybe it was psychosomatic, maybe he's just worried about her and he didn't really need to be. And he recovered from his disease. And that was how Nakulapita's disease was abandoned. That's not the end though, because then, soon after he'd recovered, he went leaning on a stick to the Buddha. On arrival, bowed down to the Blessed One and he sat to one side. And as he was sitting there, the Blessed One, the Buddha, said to him, you're fortunate, householder, so very fortunate to have Nakulamata advise and instruct you out of kindness and compassion. To the extent that I have householder female disciples who act fully in accordance with the precepts, she is one of them. To the extent that I have householder female disciples who attain inner tranquility of awareness, she is one of them. To the extent that I have householder female disciples who reach firm ground, etc., in other words, who are stream entrants, she is one of them. You are fortunate, householder. You are so very fortunate to have Nakulamata advise and instruct you out of kindness and compassion. And I thought that story was really beautiful. And I thought it was a little bit like the Aniruddhas in Gosinga, except they were householders. And they're both celibate, they're practicing the Dharma really faithfully. They're great friends to one another, they support one another. They're almost as if one mind, two bodies. Very, very similar kind of an idea, but amongst a man and woman. And that's it, except to say that I feel very fortunate to be part of this Sangha. I feel very fortunate to have been able to give these 8 talks to you all. Very fortunate that you've all turned up. Some of you every single week. I feel very fortunate about that. I feel very fortunate to have Sangharakshita as my teacher. I feel very fortunate to have Triratna as a support to live in, a community to live in. I feel very fortunate to have some really great friends. I was thinking today, earlier, of giving my friends their preeminent qualities. I won't do it in front of you all because that would be invidious to do it to some of you, but not all of you. But you know who you are, my friends. I've got things that I want to tell you. And I feel very fortunate to have friends, and I feel very fortunate to have a wife who's a really great practicing Dharma practitioner who looks after me when I'm ill and tells me not to worry. Actually, she doesn't tell me what to worry when I'm ill. She worries for me. She does all the worrying. And so I feel very, very happy and fortunate to have friends and a really great wife. And yes, so I thought this evening, what we do at the end, we'll have a break now, but what we'll do is think about how fortunate you are. Hopefully you do feel fortunate that you've got friends and so on. And if you would do similar to last week, if you want to, during the tea break, just put something in the chat box, you know, I am fortunate because of this, put that in there, and then we'll read them all out at the end as well as have questions. So also if you've got any questions, type them in there as well.